Greetings, and welcome to A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. For this project, we are using the Ivan Walters reference book of 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Each day, we watch a movie associated with the date we are watching it on.
And as it is the 20th of August, we are going to be watching The Three Faces of Eve from 1957, directed by Nunnally Johnson and starring Joanne Woodward. So to begin with, I have seen this movie previous to this viewing. Mind you, I believe I'd only seen it once before, and it was on one of that TVO series, Saturday Night at the Movies. It was quite a few years ago. I was probably in my early teens at the latest when I saw this, and it's been quite a few decades since I actually have seen it. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star Joanne Woodward, but it also stars Lee J. Cobb, Nancy Culp, David Wayne, Edwin Jerome, and Alistair Cook. Suffering from headaches and inexplicable blackouts, timid housewife Eve White, played by Joanne Woodward, begins seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Luther, played by Lee J. Cobb. He's stunned when she transforms before his eyes into the vivacious Eve Black and diagnoses her as having multiple personalities. It's not long before a third, calling herself Jane, also appears. Through hypnosis and continued therapy, Luther struggles to help Eve recall the trauma that caused her identity to fracture. Now, right out of the gate, this movie is definitely dated. The terms, which nowadays are much more common, the actual psychosis that this woman goes through has a different name. And also, the abuse that this woman suffers, like spousal abuse that is presented, and there's no condemnation for the man in this situation, the husband. And while this is based on an actual case, it does seem to be very Hollywoodized. It seems to comes forward in a very simplistic way. However, with the limited run of the movie, you obviously have to speed up the process and whatnot. But again, it's an interesting film, that is for sure. Part of the movie is the fact that Joanne Woodward does portray these three separate personalities completely different from the other, which is a very strong thing for her to be doing. The movie gives the audience the actual musical cue as the changing of the personalities, which is kind of cool. Obviously, within the movie, you don't hear because it's not diatritic music, it's actually just for the benefit of the audience. But Joanne Woodward does a fantastic job of transforming her posture, her way of speaking, her vocabulary even changes slightly depending on which version of the personality happens to be pushed forward. And having the familiar face of Lee J. Cobb playing the Dr. Luther, whereas I believe my first impression of this gentleman was The 12 Angry Men with Henry Fonda. But again, he's one of those actors that pops up every once in a while. And it took me a moment to try and remember why the husband, Ralph White, played by David Wayne, sounded familiar. I couldn't picture his face. It didn't look familiar to me, but his voice did. And then a quick IMDb, and hey, he's in the Andromeda Strain, which is a movie I saw earlier in this year. And also having a notable name of Alistair Cook being a faceless narrator that has no relevance to the story except for just to tell the audience what's going on is kind of an interesting thing to do. So it's on the 20th of August 1951 when Eve is taken to psychiatrist Dr. Luther by her husband because she is having headaches and spell where she can't remember things that are happening. And that actually happens 3 minutes into this 1 hour and 31 minute movie. And as it is the 21st of August, we are going to be watching Ride with the Devil from 1999, directed by Ang Lee and starring Tobey Maguire. So to be fully honest, I did not know of the existence of this movie, which is kind of weird because at the time that this movie was released, it was quite an interesting cast, especially when you're adding a particular singer to the actual list of actors involved with this movie. But again, even the poster didn't even look familiar until guessing this would be my first watch of this movie. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does Tobey Maguire star in this movie, but it also stars Skeet Ulrich, Jewel, Jeffrey Wright, Simon Baker, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Jim Caviezel, and Tom Gurry. On the fringes of the Civil War, Missouri bushwhackers engage in guerrilla warfare with Union Jayhawkers. Bushwhacker Jake Waddell, played by Tobey Maguire, and Jack Childs, played by Skeet Ulrich, out to avenge the murder of Jack's father. They are joined by George Clyde, played by Simon Baker, and his former slave, played by Daniel, played by Jeffrey Wright. Hiding out in the winter, Jack has a short romance with a war widow, played by Jewel, before dying. Jake steps in to take care of her and her newborn before joining Quatrell's famous Kansas raid. So like I had mentioned earlier, this cast is something that I definitely should have known about, or at least perceived at the time of being something of a monumental gathering of these actors. We're dealing with a really well done movie. It looks more like a kind of a big time TV budget sort of look, even though it is a theatrically released movie, and it is shot with theatrical events and all that sort of thing, but it has this kind of a like HBO sort of made for feel. But that being said, it's still quite entertaining. And again, everyone does fantastic with their roles. We're dealing with Southern slang and a lot of racial slurs, which are obviously common at the time that the movie takes place, but in the year it was made, it's kind of interesting to hear certain words and phrases coming out of certain actors' mouths in a casual manner. The one thing I really have to point out with this movie is the hair work in this movie is fantastic. The wigs and facial hair, whereas I can see facial hair being actually grown proper for this movie, there is a lot of very long-haired gentlemen in this, some of which at the time probably did have, but there are some that I can't picture having grown their hair to the extended lengths that they do, and it looks fantastic. Costume in this movie is really cool. There's a lot of really fun action sequences involving a lot of gunplay. There's tons of gunplay. And then there's cameos showing up left and right throughout this movie. Like, I did not see in the opening credits that a small scene has Mark Ruffalo in it, and it's just like 1999 Mark Ruffalo? Wow. So it is in the spring after the passing of Jack, again played by Skeet Ulrich. The remaining from what's left of the group of Jake, Tobey Maguire, George, played by Simon Baker, and Daniel, played by Jeffrey Wright, leave the shack they spent the winter in to join Quantrell's forces, William Quantrell being played by John Ailes. And that happens on the 21st of August, 1863, which is about an hour and 31 minutes into this 2-hour and 18-minute movie. And as it is the 22nd of August, we are going to be watching Dog Day Afternoon from 1975, directed by Sidney Lumet and starring Al Pacino. So to begin with, this is one of my personal favorite movies of Al Pacino from his early days in his career. It's actually probably one of the earliest movies that I actually saw of him at probably a time when I was probably a little too young to get the full aspect of what was actually going on in this movie. But that being said, I have seen it several times, and it was a delight to rewatch it for this project. Like I already mentioned, not only does this movie star Al Pacino, but it also stars John Cazale, Charles Durning, James Broderick, Lance Hendrickson, and Chris Sarandon. When inexperienced criminal Sonny Wartzik, played by Al Pacino, leads a bank robbery in Brooklyn, things quickly go wrong. and a hostage situation develops. As Sonny and his accomplice, Sal Natural, played by John Cazale, try desperately to remain in control, a media circus develops, and the FBI arrive, creating even more tension. Gradually, Sonny's surprising motivations behind the robbery are revealed, and his standoff with law enforcement moves towards its inevitable end. So, like I had mentioned earlier, this is definitely one of my favorite, if not my favorite performance that I've seen of Al Pacino. If you want the example of why Pacino is considered the fantastic actor that he has grown to be in the lexicon of his career, this is the movie to find out, oh, this is why this guy is such a fantastic actor. A lot of his roles, the role itself, he has a delivery that seems very, not quite rehearsed, but definitely has an improv feel to it. Again, when you're acting, you're dealing with acting against your reaction against your fellow actors and whatnot. But Pacino's delivery of his lines and his actions seem to be in a state of improvisation that makes it look so realistic. And that's not to say anyone else in this movie does a bad job of acting. It's just that Pacino, as the main core of this movie, does such a fantastic job of making this Sonny feel as realistic as possible that one can do up on film. And again, the movie itself is based on an actual event. And this is how the actual situation played out and how it ended. But from the get-go, Pacino is just charming when he wants to be charming, coarse when he needs to be coarse. And you know what? He's a smart man, even though he seems to be in over his head at a lot of points during this movie. He always seems to find a way out of it. The cast that are his hostages do a fantastic job. We have a mainly female cast that are trapped in this situation, who, through sympathy, become more sympathetic to both Sonny and Sal's plight. Charles Durning as the Sergeant already, just standing on the edge of losing total control of the situation, which he eventually does, but the struggle for him to keep control of the situation, to keep everything at a level, is just also a masterpiece of acting as well. And I can't say enough times, every single time I watch this movie, I keep forgetting about Lance Henriksen being in this movie. He shows up very late in the movie, and every single time he does, the doe-eyed young face of early 1970s Lance Henriksen is just a wonder to see. And the performance of Chris Sarandon in a role that I hadn't realized it was him till like much later on, after several watches of it, to realize who it was. It probably wasn't until after watching like the first original Fright Night that I realized, why does this guy look familiar? And then later on realized, oh my god, it's Jack Skellington. And while the movie is definitely dated to the 70s, Sidney Lumet still does a fantastic job of basically almost a bottled situation. I mean, 90% of this movie takes place in one location. And he does a fantastic job of almost every single other shot or scene getting a different angle of what is basically a rectangular room, showing it from different angles and wonderfully capturing the mood of the situation as the day carries on. And when I say day carries on, the actual events of this movie all take place on August 22nd, 1972, which is, well, the entire movie, which just happens to be 2 hours and 5 minutes long. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it ended up winning for original screenplay, as well as being nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Al Pacino, Best Supporting Actor for Chris Sarandon, and Best Film Editing. And as it is the 23rd of August, we are going to be watching The Bourne Identity from 2002, directed by Doug Liman and starring Matt Damon. So this is a movie that I definitely saw in theaters on its opening weekend. I was engaged with a bunch of friends that were into going to see movies, and this was a big box office sort of popcorn movie of the summer when it came out. We really enjoyed it. All the lead up to it, there was a great campaign pushing this movie forward, and it turned out to be quite an enjoyable time. And I've seen it several times, actually owning the movie on DVD as well. And it has, however, been probably only a couple of months since I've seen this, probably more than likely closer to a year, because I think I might have just put it on Netflix one day when it just happened to be on, or whatever streaming service I was watching it on at the time. That being said, not only does this movie also does Matt Damon, but it also stars Franca Potente, Brian Cox, Julia Stiles, Chris Cooper, Clive Owen, Adewawe Akinoye, a man salvaged near death from the ocean by an Italian fishing boat. When he recuperates, the man suffers from total amnesia. Without identity or background, except for a range of extraordinary talents in fighting, linguistic skills, and self-defense, that speaks of a dangerous past. He sets out on a desperate search, assisted by an initially rebellious Marie, to discover who he really is, and why he's being lethally pursued by assassins. So not only did this movie kick off a fantastic, entertaining franchise that has made billions of dollars in the box office throughout the years, but it also introduced a different way of filming action sequences that has a ripple effect from this point forth. The movie has very kinetic, quick moving camera moves spliced with like rapid editing between shots and skip jump points and whatnot, getting everything like a very constant on the move feeling to it. Action sequences seem more impactful when it suddenly flash and like the fight is almost over. It seems more impactful. You can up the ante on like sound effects and really pay homage to the stunt and all that sort of thing. And this also movie is just full of that. Not only do we have some great gunplay, we had some actual really great hand-to-hand combat, but the driving is also a phenomenal thing to witness. The ease of which the stunt personnel weave a vehicle through busy streets. Of course, we do realize that later on there are a lot of, editing tricks that are involved in whatnot, and a little bit of camera effects are also used as well to play up the more dangerous look. But it's still a fantastic, all over the place shots. Great explosions, fantastic locations. We're dealing with a European adventure that takes us to a lot of places that aren't familiar to normal, at least the North American viewing audience. So it's a nice thing. Plus, adding the fact that we have a well-known serious actor in Matt Damon doing an action star role. And this is near the beginning of when that is happening. Now, we've had a lot of stars that are doing action to begin with, but no one that really starts off as one thing and becomes another thing. Present day, Matt Damon is starring as a very jacked character in The Odyssey that just came out this past summer, spanning the years between 22 and 26. He's been doing all of this really fantastic action stuff. He also still does his regular routine stuff and all that, but again, he is in the class of action star because of this series. And again, this series is something that, like I said, alters the future of filmmaking for action films. Even the well put out there running series of James Bond slightly changes its way of shooting movies and editing movies to look more like a Bourne movie, which is a wonderful thing for the people that are involved with the Jason Bourne series. And of course, teaming Matt Damon up with Franca Potenti is fantastic as well. Seeing her early role of Run Lola Run, which was a favorite rental of mine from when it originally was out, seeing her in this almost kind of different but not kind of role. She plays a very strong-willed woman that has to deal with the mysteries of Matt Damon's character, who doesn't have a name till almost near the end of the movie, being eventually being referred to as Jason Bourne. But she does a fantastic job at struggling to keep up. She gets to the point where she's even like, yes, I'm going to help you, and whatever you do, you're not going to stop me from it. And of course, when you have like a Chris Cooper as the real technical heel of this movie, does a fantastic job. Fellow assassin of Clive Owen is fantastic. The guy trying to figure out what this whole entire program is, again, we're dealing with the fantastic Brian Cox. It's just so great. One of the few characters that travels throughout all the movies is Julia Stiles, with her analyst character of Nikki. And again, Julia Stiles, fantastic in this movie as well, in the small role that she has. So as it turns out, Jason's target in this movie was Nikwana Nimbozi, and he was supposed to assassinate him. Nikwana being played by Adewale Akinoye Abajwe, which was supposed to occur on August 23rd, 2001, which is discovered that time at being 1 hour and 42 minutes into this 1 hour and 59-minute movie, yet the actual event happens prior to the beginning of the movie. It's only at the 1 hour and 42 minute that the information of when it was supposed to happen is revealed. So technically, kind of not. And as it is the 24th of August, we are going to be watching Whip It from 2009, directed by Drew Barrymore and starring Ellen Page. So before we go any further, I just want to state that I am well aware that they now go by the name of Elliot from transitioning a number of years ago. However, for the concept of this, I am dealing with their name, their identity when this movie was originally released. So I will be referring to them as Ellen Page for the remainder of this particular thing. Now, I had seen this movie, and it was one of those big group apartment rentals that happened. I think it might have been at the downstairs video store that had just recently changed from a mom and pop into a Blockbuster. So there was a lot more newer movies available to us to rent. But I think that probably was the only time I had seen the movie, was way back then. So it was nice to get back to seeing this particular movie. And like I had already mentioned, not only does this movie star Ellen Page, but it also stars Aaliyah Shawkat, Marcia Gay Harden, Daniel Stern, Landon Pig, Jimmy Fallon, Kristen Wiig, and Drew Barrymore. Bliss Cavendar, played by Ellen Page, lives in a small town, Texas, and yearns to break free of her mother, played by Marcia Gay Harden, from her world of beauty pageants and conformity. She sees her chance when she meets the Hurl Scouts, a roller derby team. She tries out for the team and wins a slot. Lying to her parents about her new hobby, Bliss finds friendship and freedom with her teammates. But a conflict between a championship game and the Bluebonnet beauty pageant threatens to spill her secret. So like I'd mentioned, while it had been a while since I'd actually seen this movie, it was quite a fun movie to rewatch again. The cast seems to be a well-connected cast, especially when you're dealing with a team sport as your central core, so your group of female leads work really well together. And I'm pretty sure that is a good result of the directing that went into this. This being a Drew Barrymore directed film, you can definitely see the connection between the characters, either those on the team in Bliss's life or her family members as well. There's a lot of heart that goes into the performance that Ellen Page does in this movie. Now, it's by no means a big blockbuster, and I don't believe it was very successful in the theater, but it still is a very enjoyable watch, especially when we have character actors like, well, Drew Barrymore and Kristen Wiig in it. Daniel Stern does a fantastic job as Alyssa's father. But having Ellen Page acting up against Marcia Gay Harden is just a wonderful display of how skilled these two actors really are. I mean, giving props to Harden for sure, but Ellen definitely brings up to match her level, and it shows as being the central character of this movie. She has to carry the load of the entire movie. We also have a fun roller derby rival to Bliss's character, played by Juliette Lewis, who does a great job as a heel, but she's not really a heel to like pull it all to the end. This is a great celebration of the once popular sport of roller derby, and it's a fun watch nonetheless. So it's actually the date of August 24th, 2008, when Bliss and her friend Pash, wonderfully played by Aaliyah Shawkat, go to the actual roller derby match itself. The one that inspires through a brief conversation with Kristen Wiig's character to convince Bliss to actually show up for the trials. And that is just 10 minutes into this 1 hour and 51-minute movie. And as this is the 25th of August, we are going to be watching The Godfather from 1972, directed by Francis Ford Coppola and starring Marlon Brando. So to begin with, this is definitely a movie that I have seen and enjoyed several times since my first viewing, which I can't really track down when it was, but it might have been probably either late high school, probably was being around the time that I saw it. And I believe that I saw the first two, The Godfather and Godfather Part 2, back to back, as I believe they were probably on one of those Canadian HBO series providers, the First Choice or Super Channel, whichever it was that we had at the time. But yeah, definitely that was my first viewing. And of course, being full screen, I did not actually see the widescreen until much later on, and came to watch this movie several times since. And like I'd already mentioned, not only does this movie star Marlon Brando, but it also stars Al Pacino, James Caan, Richard S. Castellano, Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton, and Talia Shire. Based on Mario Puzo's novel of the same name, this movie focuses on the powerful Italian-American crime family of Don Vito Corleone, played by Marlon Brando. When the Don's youngest son, Michael, played by Al Pacino, reluctantly joins the mafia, he becomes involved with the inevitable cycle of violence and betrayal. Although Michael tries to maintain a normal relationship with his wife, Kay, played by Diane Keaton, he is drawn deeper into the family business. Now, there's a main reason why this movie is sometimes listed as one of the best movies ever made. Francis Ford Coppola is done a masterpiece with this movie, and it's something that he's come back to several times over and turned this into a trilogy, and then turned the trilogy into the Codex, which is a re-edit of all three movies together. But it is still, this original is outstanding in the pack, especially in a movie in the era that it came out in. It was a phenomenal thing to have probably witnessed in 72. It would have been overly graphic and violent, which is, while is kind of expected from this subject matter, probably hitting the masses at a point where they were not ready for this type of picture. But the acting is just so superb straight through, from beginning to end. This long journey that never feels as long as it actually is, because it's so beautifully written, it's so beautifully acted, and the direction is just so fantastic. Cinematography wise, this is a beautiful movie just to witness as we go from the city streets to the countryside of Italy and all over the place that this movie goes to. It's just such a wonderful visual feast as well as a great performance from some of the greatest actors to have acted throughout the 70s. And like I stated before, just earlier, when I was talking about Dog Day Afternoon, I will watch almost anything that Al Pacino is in. And this is definitely probably would have been the second movie that I saw him in after Dog Day Afternoon, because I'm pretty sure I saw Dog Day Afternoon while I was in high school. And this was definitely a fantastic lead up, even though it was the movie that came before. And I could go on, but if you've seen the movie, you don't need a convincing about the quality and the showmanship that this movie gives you. So the movie starts off with Vito Corleone's daughter, Connie's wedding. It was played by Talia Shire, and that basically is August 25th, 1945. And like I said, it's practically the very beginning of the movie into this 2 hour and 55-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it actually ended up winning for Best Picture, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor for Marlon Brando, and also got nominations for Best Supporting Actor for Al Pacino, James Caan, and Robert Duvall, Best Director, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Mixing. And as it is the 26th of August, we are going to be watching The Day of the Jackal from 1973, directed by Fred Zinnerman and starring Edward Fox. So, to put it out there, I have seen this movie before. I've actually seen it a number of times. It's a very cool movie that I discovered. I believe it was just on regular television when I originally watched it. And it just was so long and I just got so wrapped up in it. I'm pretty sure my original viewing of the movie was edited for television, so it was just for time. So there were scenes missing, and it wasn't until I was actually able to watch it on probably one of the network shows, the streaming services, well, maybe not streaming at the time, but it would have been one of the classic movie channels that we had available to us back in the day. I have never seen this movie on Blu-ray or DVD or anything like that. I've only just witnessed it on broadcasted television. So this would probably be my very first time watching it fully through from start to finish with no ad breaks or whatever. And like I'd already mentioned, the movie does star Edward Fox, but also stars Michael Lonsdale, Alan Battle, Derek Jacobi, Michael Auclair, Cyril Cusack, and Maurice Denham. An underground French paramilitary group is intent on eliminating President Charles de Gaulle, played by Adrian Kala. But when numerous attempts on his life fail, they resort to hiring the infamous hitman known as the Jackal, played by Edward Fox. As the enigmatic assassin prepares to shoot de Gaulle, he takes out any problematic people along the way. Meanwhile, Labelle, played by Michael Lonsdale, a savvy Parisian police detective, begins to solve the mystery of the killer's identity. So this movie is just straight out a great 70s thriller noir spy film. We deal with a great version of this movie as we follow almost three sides of this equation. Now, this is based on a novel, but I'm not 100% sure how the novel goes, but we get a really neat perspective on this as we actually follow the three different factions throughout the course of this movie. Well, not only do we have the underground OAS that want to perform the assassination, and how they deal with obviously not having to be able to be successful and then having to hire someone and then trying to exist through the rest as their members are being picked off by the police. We also follow the Jackal himself as he becomes hired and goes through the stages and steps to preparing himself with several different cohorts and assistants to get him to the point that it needs to. And then we also follow the police that are actually trying to track down not only members of the OAS, but to figure out who this mystery assassin is throughout the entire thing. So we get to jump back and forth between the perspective, and it's kind of neat because the audience is aware of all four perspectives, and you can see the pieces of the puzzle that the other members are trying to figure out. And it's kind of an interesting way to tell the story, especially when you're dealing with a early 70s stylistic movie. Now, the cast that we are presented do a fabulous job at giving an atmosphere of suspense that is very palpable throughout the whole entire thing. You're never really sure who is actually going to end up the victor, I guess, as what you're looking at the end. Like, which one of these three different stories that we're following is going to be the one that comes out on top at the end. It's a very interesting way to do it. It's a classic espionage film, and we are dealing with the great details, like I said, that are pulled to life by this fantastic cast of actors. I don't normally do this, but spoilers. As the failed assassination attempt on de Gaulle fails the following day, which is August 26, 1963, the Jackal, who got killed, is buried in an unmarked grave. And that is about 2 hours and 19 minutes into this 2 hour and 23-minute movie. And when it came to the Academy Awards for that particular season, it ended up being nominated for Best Film Editing. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this particular episode and look off into the future to see what we're going to be watching for tomorrow, which is August 27th, and that is Moneyball from 2011. So until next time, go see a movie.
This has been A Year of Movies, a Planet Geek production. Please be sure to subscribe, download, comment, share, rate, and review. Once again, another thanks to Ivan Walters for his book, A Year of Movies, 365 films to watch on the day they happened. Look for it online or at your local bookstore. Follow Planet Geek Productions on all of our social media. Through Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Tumblr, and Letterboxd, search for Planet Geek Productions. On X, former Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky, search for Planet Geek Pod. You can also reach out to us through email at planetgeekpod@gmail.com. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and until next time, go see a movie.